you're going to have to translate the words into a picture that's going to be a right triangle. And then you have to label the problem so that you have the information in front of you, and then you're just going to use one of your trig ratios. If you get really lucky, you might just have to use the Pythagorean theorem. Does that make sense? All right? But sometimes people get confused, okay? Nobody gets confused with the angle of elevation, because the angle of elevation, obviously elevation means going up. So when you go up from the floor, you can't really screw that up, right? So that angle there in this triangle would be considered the angle of elevation. But when you talk about an angle of depression, sometimes guys make mistakes. So for example, this is a flagpole. Let's say it's a flagpole, right? So the top of the flagpole and somebody's standing here, that's the angle of elevation to the top of the flagpole. But if you were on the top of the flagpole and there was an angle of depression, sometimes people make the mistake and they think this is the angle of depression. That's not the angle of depression. The angle of depression, is formed, you gotta go horizontal on the horizon. And here's how you remember that. It's gonna be parallel to the ground, right? So this angle here is the angle of depression, all right? Now, if you look really closely, what you end up with is two parallel lines cut by a transversal. So the angle of elevation and the angle of depression are alternate interior angles. So they're always the same. So if I tell you the angle of depression is 25 degrees, really what I'm telling you is that the angle of elevation is 25 degrees. Does that make sense? Yes? All righty. So that's really all you got to be careful of. And the hardest part of the problems is making sure you draw the diagram correctly and then label it. And then you just figure out what trig ratio you want to use, all right? So let's look at the first one that I drew on the board here. And this is going to be an angle of elevation problem. Nice and basic, nothing crazy. Ready? So I'm going to read it out loud. You just make sure you understand what I'm just saying, right? The angle between the top of a building and a point 80 feet from the base of the building is 70 degrees. How tall is the building? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to actually draw the building. So there's your building. All right, and it says the angle between the top of a building and a point 80 feet from the base of the building. Well, here's the base of the building, and I just got to go out 80 feet. And then there's an angle from the top of the building to the 80 feet from the base. So they're giving me the angle of elevation, and they tell me it's 70 degrees. Can you guys all see that? All righty? Now watch what you do. Just get rid of the rest of the building. And what do you got? You have a right triangle. All righty? Now, what's the last question? How tall is the building? So there's your data. Now, based on that data, what trig ratio would you use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Anybody? You got to unmute yourself. Hello? Sine.
Sine.
Opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine. Adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent. Opposite over adjacent. Fellas, you can never screw up the tangent. Why? Look, what's the only one that doesn't have the hypotenuse in it?
Tangent.
If you look at that picture, where's the hypotenuse? right?
No.
So we don't have that. What do we have? Opposite over adjacent. What do we got?
Tangent.
Tangent. So the tangent of 70 has to be equal to x over 80. Does everybody see how you do that? That's not that hard, right? And fellas, you do realize, like, when you're taking your test today, you can use your notes, you can use your textbook, you can go back and look at the videos of the classes that the topic is on. The only thing you can't do is use each other. Does that make sense? All righty. Who wants to take a shot? What's the first step you do in solving this?
Cross multiply.
Cross multiply. So x times 1 is just x, right? And 80 times the tangent of 70. So nice and easy. Plug it into your calculator. What do you get when you got 80 times the tangent of 70?
219.8.
What do you got?
219.8.
219.8. Is that what you got? I don't know if that's right or not. I don't have my
Yes, sir.
calculator with. Is that what you all got? Did you guys all get that?
Yeah, I got that.
All righty, good. Does that make sense? Hey, fellas, angle of elevation is really not that difficult. What else? What other ratio could you have set up? Just go back to this, just so you know all the things. Don't forget the stuff that you don't see there. Ready? Look at this. Let me draw this a little bit bigger, all right? This is the picture of the triangle, right? And then we use the tangent of 70, right? Hey, fellas, you could have done this too. What's that angle? If that's 90 and that's 70, what's that?
20.
Thank you. Hey, opposite over adjacent. You could have used the tangent of 20 if you wanted. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
All righty.
That makes sense.
Here we go. Second one. Now we're going to talk about the angle of depression. And I just want to make sure you don't make the mistake they want you to make. Ready? So I'm going to read it nice and slowly for you so you can imagine what's going on in your head. A buoy in the ocean is observed from the top of an oil rig that is 40 meters high. The angle of depression from the top of the oil rig to the buoy is 6 degrees. How far is the buoy from the base of the oil rig? All righty. So here's what I know I have. I have the ocean, and in the ocean is a buoy. Can you all see that? And out here is an oil rig. And they tell me that the oil rig is 40 meters high, right? And we know that that's going to be a right angle, right? So we go back to our question. The oil rig is 40 meters high. The angle of depression from the top of the oil rig to the buoy is 6 degrees. All right, so I'm just going to draw the line from the top of the oil rig to the buoy. Now, they tell you that the angle of depression is 6 degrees. So what's the mistake they want you to make? They want you to tell them that this is 6 degrees. But that's not the angle of depression. What do you got to do to draw the angle of depression? Draw the horizontal, and this is 6 degrees. Now, fellas, if that's 6 degrees, what's that?
6 degrees.
Thank you very much. Now, you still haven't answered the question. Fellas, a lot of guys forget to answer the actual question. Ready? How far is the buoy from the base of the oil rig? Now, if I was a really good artist, I wouldn't have drawn a line. I would have drawn an oil rig. But I'm not. So how far? That means X. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no?
Yes.
All righty. Now, given the information, what are you going to use? Well, what don't you have?
Hypotenuse.
We don't have the hypotenuse, so what's the only trig ratio that doesn't have the hypotenuse in it?
Tangent.
Tan.
Yeah, so we're going to go, the tangent of 6 has to be equal to opposite over adjacent. So now we're just going to go over here and do our schoolwork, right? So I got the tangent of 6 has to be equal to 40 over x. All righty. Who wants to solve that for me? What's the first thing we do? Hello?
Cross multiply.
40 equals x times the tangent of 6. How do you get x by itself?
Divide by tangent.
Divide.
There you go. And remember, you don't ever change those to decimals, right? You just let the calculator do it so you don't get any rounding off, right? So we got what? 40 divided by the tangent of 6 is going to be what?
380.57.
All right, so we go 380.6. Hey, fellas, here's what you should have realized. Look at that diagram. The side opposite the 6-degree angle is 40. This angle's 84. So this side has to be a lot bigger. Like if this is 6 degrees and that's 40, this angle's 84. This has got to be huge. Does that make sense to you? Is that huge?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. See, like if you had done your work and you told me X was 27, how would you have known you did something wrong? Well, the side opposite 6 is 40. So this side can't possibly be smaller than that. Does that make sense? That's just stuff that you should know about triangles that help you do the work. All righty? So those are the last 2 things you got to work about. Now, so you got to be careful because sometimes they try to trick you. All right? So I'll show you what I mean by they try to trick you. Ready? Sometimes they try to trick you with the angle of depression or the angle of elevation. Here's what they do to you. Ready? Hunter, how tall are you?
6'5".
Who's 6 foot? Anybody 6 foot? Anybody 6 foot? Gunderson, you're now 6 foot.
I'm
What's
6
that for you? Who's 6 foot?
I'm 5'11".
Who's 6 foot?
I'm 6 foot.
Mears wishes he was 6 foot. All right, here we go.
I'm 6 foot, sir.
So Xavier.
I am 6 foot. I'm 5'11".
All right, now pay attention. Pay attention because this is going to be on your exam, so don't screw this up. Ready? Let's pretend Xavier is standing at the corner of the football field. All right? And there's a big, huge scoreboard up in the middle of the football field because now Xavier's playing for the New Orleans Saints. Right? So the scoreboard's way up here. Right? Can you guys see that? All right. So Xavier is standing on. Now we know Xavier is 6 feet tall. And then they tell you the angle of elevation from Xavier's eyes up to the scoreboard is 40 degrees. So here's what they want you to do. This is the question that you're really asked. All right. So if I tell you this scoreboard is 80 feet from the ground, what's the height you're going to use for your problem? How tall is Xavier?
6 feet.
6. So I'm not doing it from the ground. I'm doing it from his eyes. So I'm not going to use 80. What am I going to use? If it's 80 from here to here, and Xavier's 6 feet tall, what's it from here to here?
74.
Thank you very much. Does everybody see how they do that? That's the trick that's the trick question they always give people. You know, so don't make that mistake. All right. Now, what do you know about the length of this? It's the same as the length of that. Okay. Does that make sense? Comprende? Right? And you know that's on your test because you've already seen your test, right? Yeah, that's like the last question on your test. So don't make that mistake because I've warned you about it. All righty? Now, that is all of the topics that they went over in chapter 8 for you. Does anybody have anything they need me to answer for them? Does anybody have any questions, something they're confused with? Don't be afraid to ask me questions. That's what we're here for. All righty? So, anybody have any questions on anything in the chapter?
I'm confused on finding like the angles of identifying if it's right acute or obtuse when you're given the
Okay, good.
sides.
All right, I got you. So, Hunter, you're talking about the questions that say, hey, these are the three sides of a triangle. Is it a right, obtuse, or acute? Is that the
Yeah.
question? All right.
That's like the first one on the test, and that's when I read that. I knew that's one I need to ask
All
about.
righty, so let's just do one. I'm going to make up three numbers. I'm not going to give you the numbers that are on the test, all right? That would be crazy, all right? So let's make up three numbers. One side is 7, one side is 9, one side is 13. Does that make sense there, Hunter?
Yes, sir.
All right, so the question says you have three sides of a triangle, 7, 9, and 13. Tell me or classify the triangle as either right, obtuse, or acute. So what we try to do with this is we try to see if it's a right triangle, because what do we know about the three sides of a right triangle? The hypotenuse squared equals the sum of the squares of the two legs, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
All right, and all you got to remember is which of those three numbers would be the hypotenuse?
The biggest one.
The biggest one. So I'm going to take the 13 and put it here. Now, A and B, it doesn't matter. You can put them either way. All right? Now, if I do that work and that actually comes and gives me a truthful answer, then I know it's a right triangle. So what's 13 squared? 169, right? What's 7 squared? 49. What's 9 squared? 81. So 49 and 81. Well, 9 and 1 is 10, right? 130. Well, what kind of triangle isn't it?
Right triangle.
Yeah, it's not a right triangle because if it was, these two numbers would be the same, right? But they're not the same. So Hunter, tell me, is it this or is it this?
It's the other way.
169 is?
And yeah, there you go.
Right, good. Now, here's how you tell if it's obtuse or acute. If the hypotenuse squared is bigger than the sum of the squares of the sides, then it's obtuse. If the hypotenuse squared is less than, then it's acute. Now, the only way I remember that when I was in school was obtuse means bigger than 90, acute means less than 90. So if I said 169 is greater than, then I did obtuse, right? You just got to make sure you use the hypotenuse. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that clear that up for you, Hunter?
Yes, sir.
So what you want to do is you want to see if it's a right triangle. And if it's a right triangle, you're done. And if it's not a right triangle, then you just want to see if it's obtuse or acute. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All righty. Anybody else have any questions on anything? That's a good question. You got your test in front of you, so you know what's coming. So like if you see something and you don't know what it means, you should be asking me questions like I'm standing here. Now, I do have office hours today at 2, and I have office hours tomorrow at 9 a.m. So don't be afraid to get on the horn, right? The whole idea of school is to learn how to think, right? Not to get answers, to learn how to think. All righty? So you guys can work away on your test while you're there. And if you come across something that's confusing to you, just ask the question. You know, we got the Pythagorean theorem, we got trig ratios, we got law of sines, we got angles of elevation, angles of depression, right? Those are basically the topics you're working with.